No human was allowed inside the royal palace of Arkan. This rule had existed for more than 200 years. Every alien in the Empire believed humans were reckless, violent, and impossible to control. Because of that belief, the palace gates were always closed to them. Royal guards were trained with one simple order. Most humans did not even come close to the city because they knew the rule. But on one unusual night, a single human broke that rule. And before the night ended, that human would change the fate of the entire empire. His name was Daniel Cross. Daniel was not a soldier or a hero. He was only a mechanic who repaired broken cargo ships at the lower space docks. His clothes were always covered in oil and dust. Most people barely noticed him when he walked past them, but that night, Daniel heard something he was never supposed to hear. It started while he was repairing an old transport ship late in the evening. The space docks were quiet and almost empty. Most workers had already gone home. Only the sound of tools and distant engines filled the air. Daniel was tightening a loose engine plate when he heard a strange noise nearby. A ship was landing in a restricted docking area. Daniel looked up and frowned. Ships were not allowed to land there without royal permission. Curious, he carefully walked closer and hid behind a large cargo container. The ship that landed was completely black. It had no symbols, no lights, and no identification marks. 3 tall alien soldiers stepped out of the ship. Their armor looked dark and dangerous. Daniel stayed hidden and listened carefully. The aliens began speaking in low voices. Daniel only understood parts of their conversation, but the words he heard made his heart freeze. "Everything is ready," one of them said quietly. "The queen is already weak from the poison," another replied. "The palace security will fall quickly when she is gone," the third soldier said calmly. Daniel felt a cold chill move down his spine. They were planning to kill the queen, and they were planning to do it tonight. Daniel slowly stepped back from the cargo container. His mind was racing. He knew humans were banned from the palace. If he tried to warn the guards, they might arrest him first and ask questions later. But if he stayed silent, the queen would die. Daniel stood there for a long moment thinking. Finally he sighed and shook his head. He was just a mechanic. This was not his problem. But deep inside he knew he could not ignore it. Daniel grabbed a small repair tool from his belt and looked toward the distant palace towers glowing under the purple moons. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let's do something stupid." Sneaking into the palace was almost impossible. Energy scanners covered the walls. Security drones flew through the sky, and dozens of guards protected every entrance. But Daniel had spent his entire life fixing machines, and machines always had weak points. Near the outer palace wall, he found a small maintenance panel hidden behind a stone pillar. Daniel opened it carefully and connected his repair tool to the control wires. The security system flickered for just 2 seconds. That was enough time. Daniel quickly slipped through a narrow service tunnel before the scanners turned back on. The tunnel was dark and dusty. Pipes hummed softly above him as he crawled forward. After several minutes, he finally reached a small exit door. Daniel slowly pushed it open and stepped into the palace gardens. The sight in front of him was breathtaking. Crystal fountains glowed with soft blue light. Tall alien trees moved gently in the wind, and beautiful statues surrounded the garden paths. But Daniel did not have time to admire anything. Somewhere inside this palace, assassins were moving toward the queen, and he had no idea where she was. Just then he heard voices nearby. 2 royal guards were walking past the garden entrance. Daniel quickly hid behind a tall statue and listened. "The queen is still in the medical chamber," one guard said. "The poison attack earlier weakened her badly," the other replied. Daniel's eyes widened with shock. The attack had already begun. If the queen was weak, she would be an easy target. Daniel slowly stepped out from behind the statue and looked toward the palace corridors. He needed to reach the medical chamber quickly. But suddenly a quiet metallic sound came from behind him. Daniel turned around slowly. 3 dark figures stepped out from the shadows of the garden. They were the same alien soldiers from the docks. Each one held a glowing energy blade in their hands. One of them looked at Daniel and smiled coldly. "A human inside the palace," the assassin said calmly. "That is very unexpected." Daniel felt his heart start beating faster. The tallest assassin raised his blade and pointed it toward him. "You heard our conversation," the alien said quietly. "That means you cannot leave this place alive." Daniel took one step back. He had no weapon, no armor, and no combat training. Just a mechanic's tool in his hand. But somewhere deep inside the palace, the alien queen was waiting for help. And if Daniel died here tonight, no one would stop the assassins. The three soldiers slowly began walking toward him, their glowing blades lighting the dark garden path. And Daniel realized something terrifying. The fate of the queen, and maybe the entire empire, now depended on one poor human mechanic. The three assassins moved slowly through the glowing palace garden. Their energy blades hummed softly in the quiet night. Daniel Cross stood frozen for a moment, his heart beating loudly in his chest. He was only a mechanic, not a fighter. The men in front of him were trained killers. But Daniel knew one terrible truth. If he ran away now, the alien queen would die. And everything he heard at the docks would become reality. The tallest assassin stepped forward first. His glowing blade reflected in the blue light of the garden fountains. "You should have stayed in the docks." "Human," the alien said calmly. Daniel slowly lifted the small repair tool in his hand. It looked ridiculous compared to the assassin's weapon, but it was the only thing he had. "Yeah," Daniel replied nervously. "I make a lot of bad decisions." The assassin did not laugh. Instead, he attacked without warning. The glowing blade sliced through the air toward Daniel's chest. Daniel jumped sideways just in time. The blade cut through a crystal statue behind him, shattering it instantly. Pieces of glowing stone exploded across the garden floor. Daniel ran. He sprinted between the trees as fast as he could. The assassins chased him silently, moving like shadows. Daniel's mind raced as he ran. He could not defeat them in a fight, but maybe he could slow them down. He turned sharply and rushed toward a glowing fountain in the center of the garden. Behind the fountain stood a tall maintenance pillar connected to the palace systems. Daniel quickly opened the panel with his tool. The assassins were already close behind him. "You cannot escape," one of them called out coldly. Daniel ignored the voice and cut several wires inside the panel. Sparks flew into the air. Suddenly the entire garden went dark. All the glowing lights shut down at once. The assassin stopped for a moment, confused by the sudden darkness. That moment was exactly what Daniel needed. He ran again, this time toward the palace corridor doors. His lungs burned as he pushed them open and rushed inside. The palace corridors were massive and silent. Long silver walls stretched in every direction. But now the emergency lights were flashing red. The system Daniel damaged had triggered a security warning. Footsteps echoed behind him. The assassins had already entered the palace. Daniel kept running through the corridors, turning corners randomly. He did not know where the medical chamber was, but he had to find it before the assassins did. Suddenly, a group of royal guards appeared at the end of the hallway. They raised their weapons immediately when they saw him. "Human!" One guard shouted, "Stop right there!" Daniel froze. This was exactly what he feared. If the guards arrested him now, the assassins would reach the queen easily. "Listen!" Daniel shouted quickly, "The queen is in danger." But before he could explain anything, a dark figure suddenly appeared behind him. One of the assassins had caught up. The alien soldier moved incredibly fast. His blade slashed toward the guards. 2 guards fell instantly, their weapons dropping to the floor. The corridor exploded with chaos. The remaining guards opened fire. Blue energy bolts filled the hallway. Daniel dove behind a wall to avoid the blast. The assassin moved like a ghost, dodging the attacks easily. Within seconds, the guards were defeated. The alien turned slowly toward Daniel again. Now there was no one left to protect him. The assassin walked forward calmly, his glowing blade raised. "You caused too much trouble," the alien said quietly. Daniel backed away slowly, his mind searching desperately for a solution. Then suddenly he noticed something on the wall beside him. A large emergency control switch. Without thinking, Daniel slammed his hand on it. A loud alarm exploded through the palace. Metal doors began slamming shut across the corridors. Security barriers dropped from the ceiling. The assassin's eyes widened with anger as a thick metal wall suddenly crashed down between them. Daniel fell back against the floor, breathing heavily. For the moment, he was safe. But the palace alarms were now screaming everywhere, and that meant something worse. More assassins could already be inside the palace. Daniel slowly stood up and looked down the empty corridor. Somewhere ahead was the medical chamber where the queen was resting. He started running again. After several minutes, he reached a large white door guarded by 2 nervous soldiers. He shouted, "The queen is in danger." The guards looked confused. "A human?" one of them said in shock. Before they could react, a terrifying explosion shook the hallway behind Daniel. The metal barrier he activated had been destroyed. The assassins were coming again. Not 3 assassins this time, but 6. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He had thought there were only 3 attackers, but now he realized something far worse. The palace was already full of enemies, and the queen had no idea death was walking toward her door. One of the assassins pointed directly at Daniel. "That human is the problem," the alien said coldly. "Kill him first." The 6 assassins stepped out of the smoke slowly. Their dark armor reflected the flashing red emergency lights. Daniel Cross stood near the medical chamber door, breathing hard. 2 royal guards stood beside him, their weapons raised toward the approaching enemies. For a moment the hallway became completely silent. The tension in the air felt heavy and dangerous. Daniel knew something very important. Those assassins were not afraid of palace guards. They had come prepared. One of the assassins tilted his head slightly and looked at Daniel. "The human is still alive," he said calmly. Another assassin laughed quietly. "That will change in a moment." The 2 royal guards tightened their grip on their weapons. "You will go no further," one guard warned firmly. The assassins did not even slow down. They continued walking forward like unstoppable shadows. Daniel could see the confidence in their movements. These were not normal soldiers. They were elite killers. Suddenly the guards opened fire. Bright blue energy bolts exploded down the hallway. The assassins moved instantly. 2 of them jumped sideways while another raised a small energy shield. The blast struck the shield and scattered into the walls. Within seconds, the assassins were already close. One guard shouted and fired again, but an energy blade flashed through the air. The guard's weapon fell to the floor in 2 pieces. The second guard tried to fight back, but he was thrown against the wall by a powerful strike. Daniel's heart pounded as the guards collapsed. Now he was standing alone again. The assassins stopped a few steps away from him. One of them pointed toward the large medical chamber door behind Daniel. "The queen is inside," the assassin said quietly. "Open the door." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not happening," he replied. The assassins exchanged amused looks. "You think you can stop us?" one of them asked. Daniel lifted the small repair tool in his hand again. "I don't think," he said. "I just try." For the first time, one of the assassins actually laughed. But the laugh ended quickly. The tallest assassin stepped forward and raised his glowing blade. "This ends now," he said coldly. Daniel knew he could not defeat them in a fight, but he also knew something about machines, and the palace was full of machines. Without warning, Daniel turned and slammed his tool into the control panel beside the medical chamber door. Sparks exploded from the system instantly. The entire corridor lights flickered wildly. Emergency metal shields suddenly dropped from the ceiling behind the assassins, cutting them off from the rest of the palace. The assassins looked around with anger as the hallway sealed itself completely. Daniel had locked them all inside the same corridor. Now there was only one entrance left, the medical chamber door behind him. The assassins slowly turned back toward Daniel. "You trapped yourself with us," one of them said. Daniel shrugged nervously. "Yeah," he answered. "I noticed." The assassins rushed forward at once. Daniel grabbed the fallen guard weapon from the floor and fired wildly. Energy bolts filled the hallway again. 2 assassins dodged the attacks easily, but one of them was forced to step back. Daniel used that moment to run toward the medical chamber door. He slammed his hand on the door control panel. The door slowly began to open. Behind him, the assassins were already catching up. One of them threw a small blade across the hallway. The blade struck Daniel in the shoulder. Pain exploded through his arm. Daniel stumbled forward, but did not stop. The medical chamber door finally opened wide enough. Daniel rushed inside and turned around quickly. He slammed the emergency lock button beside the door. The heavy door shut just as the assassins reached it. Their glowing blades struck the metal surface with loud sparks. Daniel collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. His shoulder burned from the wound, but he was still alive for the moment. The assassins were locked outside. The medical chamber was quiet and filled with soft white light. Strange medical machines hummed gently around the room. In the center of the chamber stood a floating medical bed, and on that bed lay the alien queen. Daniel slowly looked up at her. She looked far weaker than he expected. Her silver skin was pale, and several medical tubes were connected to glowing machines beside the bed. The poison the guards mentioned earlier had clearly hurt her badly. Daniel took a careful step closer. The queen's eyes slowly opened. Her glowing blue eyes focused directly on him. For a moment, both of them stared at each other in silence. "A human," the queen whispered weakly. Her voice sounded surprised but calm. Daniel gave a small, awkward smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that's not normal here." The queen studied him carefully. "Why are you inside my palace?" she asked softly. Before Daniel could answer, a loud explosion shook the medical chamber door. The assassins were trying to break through. The metal door bent slightly under the powerful attack. Daniel looked back at the door with worry. "They're here to kill you," he said quickly. The queen's expression became serious, but strangely, she did not look afraid. Instead, she looked at Daniel again with quiet curiosity. "You risked your life to warn me," she said slowly. Daniel shrugged slightly, wincing from the pain in his shoulder. "I heard their plan," he explained, "and nobody else knew." Another powerful explosion shook the door again. Large cracks were beginning to form in the metal surface. The assassins would break through soon. Daniel looked around the room desperately for something he could use to defend them, but there were only medical machines everywhere. The queen slowly sat up on the medical bed. Even in her weakened state, she looked powerful and calm. She looked directly at Daniel again and asked a question he did not expect. "Human," she said quietly, "are you willing to fight for someone your people were forbidden to even approach?" Daniel looked at the cracking door, then back at the queen. He sighed tiredly. "Honestly," he said, "I was hoping tonight would be a normal work shift." The medical chamber door suddenly split open with a loud blast, and the assassins finally entered the room. The medical chamber door burst open with a violent explosion. Pieces of metal crashed across the floor as smoke filled the room. 6 assassins stepped through the broken doorway slowly. Their glowing energy blades lit the white chamber with dangerous light. Daniel Cross stood between them and the alien queen. His injured shoulder burned with pain, but he forced himself to stay standing. Behind him, the queen had managed to sit up on the floating medical bed. Her face still looked weak from the poison, but her glowing eyes were calm and sharp. The assassins stopped a few steps inside the room. Their leader looked at Daniel with clear amusement. "A mechanic," he said quietly. "You have caused us far too much trouble tonight." Daniel held the stolen guard weapon tightly in his good hand. "I hear that a lot," he replied nervously. The assassin leader tilted his head slightly. "You understand you cannot stop us," he continued. Daniel glanced back for a moment at the queen. Then he looked forward again at the assassins. "Probably not," he said honestly. "But I can slow you down." The assassins attacked instantly. 2 of them rushed forward with incredible speed. Daniel fired the guard weapon quickly. Bright blue energy bolts shot across the room. One assassin dodged easily, but the second was forced to roll aside. Daniel moved sideways, placing himself directly in front of the queen's medical bed. Another assassin jumped toward him with a raised blade. Daniel barely avoided the strike. The glowing weapon sliced through a medical machine beside him. Sparks exploded into the air. Daniel grabbed the broken machine and pushed it toward the attacker. The heavy device crashed into the assassin and slowed him for a moment. But the others were already moving again. One blade cut across Daniel's arm. Another strike hit his side and threw him to the floor. Pain exploded through his body. The guard weapon slid across the floor out of his reach. The assassins slowly surrounded him. Daniel struggled to push himself up again. Blood stained his clothes, but he refused to stay down. Behind him, the queen watched silently. The assassin leader stepped closer. "You should have stayed in the docks," he said calmly. Daniel wiped blood from his mouth and gave a weak smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Probably." The assassin raised his blade, ready to finish the fight, but suddenly something unexpected happened. A powerful wave of energy suddenly spread across the room. All the medical machines began glowing brightly at once. The assassins paused in confusion. Daniel looked back toward the queen. She was standing now. Her silver skin glowed softly with a strange light. Even though she looked weak before, something had clearly changed. The queen slowly raised one hand toward the assassins. Her voice was calm but powerful. "You came a long way to die tonight," she said quietly. The assassins quickly realized the danger. Two of them rushed toward her immediately. But the queen's hand moved slightly. A sudden invisible force slammed the attackers across the room. They crashed into the far wall with a loud impact. Daniel stared in shock. He had no idea the queen possessed such power. But the fight was not over yet. The assassin leader growled with anger and charged forward, his blade glowing brighter than before. The queen's power pushed him back slightly, but he continued moving forward step by step. Daniel saw the danger immediately. The queen was still weak from the poison. Her power was not at full strength. If the assassin reached her, she might not survive the attack. Without thinking, Daniel forced himself to stand again. His legs trembled from exhaustion and pain, but he stepped directly into the assassin's path. The alien soldier looked surprised for a moment. "You again," the assassin said coldly. Daniel raised his fists weakly. "Yeah," he answered, "still here." The assassin attacked instantly. The blade stabbed forward toward Daniel's chest. Daniel moved just enough to block the strike with his injured arm. Pain exploded through his body as the blade cut deeply into his shoulder. But Daniel did not step back. Instead, he grabbed the assassin's arm tightly. Holding him in place, the assassin tried to pull free, but Daniel refused to let go. Behind them, the queen focused her remaining strength. Her glowing hand lifted slowly again. The assassin suddenly realized the trap too late. A powerful energy force slammed into him, throwing him across the room into the wall beside the others. The chamber finally became silent again. All 6 assassins lay unconscious across the floor. Daniel released his grip and collapsed to his knees. His entire body shook with exhaustion. The queen slowly walked toward him, her glowing power fading again as the poison weakened her body. She looked down at the injured human carefully. "You stood between me and death," she said softly. Daniel looked up at her with tired eyes. "I guess mechanics do more than fix engines sometimes," he replied weakly. For a moment the queen studied him in silence. Then she said something that Daniel did not expect at all. "Human," she said quietly, "tonight you did something no warrior in my empire could do." Daniel tried to laugh but only managed a tired smile. "Well," he said slowly, "I hope that means I'm not getting arrested." Before the queen could answer, loud footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway outside. The palace security forces had finally arrived. Dozens of elite royal warriors rushed into the medical chamber, their weapons immediately aimed at the only standing stranger in the room, Daniel Cross. And from their point of view, it looked exactly like a human had just attacked the queen. One of the commanders raised his weapon and shouted loudly, "Human, step away from the queen immediately." Daniel slowly raised his hands, too tired to argue, but the queen suddenly spoke with calm authority. "Lower your weapons," she ordered firmly. The entire room froze instantly. The commander looked confused. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this human is extremely dangerous." The queen shook her head slowly. "No," she replied. "He is the only reason I am still alive." The soldiers stared at Daniel with shock. But the queen had not finished speaking yet. She looked at the human mechanic again and said something that would soon spread across the entire empire. "This human did not just save my life. He has just changed the fate of the galaxy." The medical chamber was filled with silence after the queen's words. Dozens of royal warriors stood frozen, their weapons still pointed at Daniel Cross. No one expected the queen to defend a human. For centuries, humans had been forbidden from entering the palace. And now the queen herself was standing beside one. Daniel slowly lowered his raised hands. His body still trembled from the wounds and exhaustion. Blood stained his shirt, and his injured shoulder burned with pain. The commander of the royal guards stepped forward carefully. He looked at the unconscious assassins lying across the floor. Then he looked back at Daniel with deep suspicion. "Your Majesty," the commander said slowly, "are you certain this human was helping you?" The queen nodded calmly. "He fought to protect me while your guards were still trying to understand the attack," she replied. The commander looked uncomfortable hearing those words. Several soldiers quickly moved to secure the assassins, placing energy restraints on their arms. Daniel leaned against the wall, feeling the strength slowly leaving his body. A royal medical officer rushed toward him with a small glowing scanner. "You are badly injured," the doctor said. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yeah, that happens when you fight 6 assassins with a wrench," he answered weakly. The soldiers looked at each other with surprise. The commander stepped closer to the captured assassins and examined their armor carefully. Suddenly, his expression changed. "This symbol," he said quietly. He turned toward the queen immediately. "Your Majesty." The commander looked confused. "You know," he asked. The queen slowly walked closer to the restrained attackers. She studied their armor carefully. Then she spoke in a calm voice. "They belong to the Shadow Court," she said. The entire room reacted instantly. Several soldiers gasped quietly. The commander's face turned pale. "The Shadow Court was destroyed years ago," he said in disbelief. The queen shook her head slowly. "No," she replied. "They only disappeared into the darkness." Daniel listened quietly while the conversation continued. He had never heard of the Shadow Court before, but judging by the soldiers' reactions, it was something very dangerous. The queen turned toward Daniel again. "You heard them speaking earlier," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "They said something about poison and taking control of the palace," he explained. The queen's expression became serious. "That poison was not meant to kill me immediately," she said. "It was meant to weaken me so the assassins could finish the job tonight." The commander clenched his fists angrily. "This means someone inside the palace helped them," he said. The room became silent again. Daniel suddenly understood the real danger. If someone inside the palace had helped the attackers, the threat was not over yet. The queen seemed to reach the same conclusion. She turned toward the commander and spoke firmly. "Seal the palace," she ordered. "No one enters or leaves until we discover the traitor." The commander bowed his head immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied. Soldiers rushed out of the chamber to carry out the order. The palace security system quickly moved into full lockdown mode. Heavy security doors began sealing every entrance across the palace. Daniel watched all of this quietly. He never expected his night to become this complicated. The queen stepped closer to him again. "You risked your life for someone your people were forbidden to even approach," she said softly. Daniel shrugged weakly. "I just didn't like the idea of someone getting murdered," he replied. The queen studied his face carefully for a moment. Then she spoke again in a thoughtful tone. "Most soldiers in my empire would have run away from 6 assassins," she said. Daniel gave a small, tired laugh. "Well, I tried running earlier," he admitted. "They kept following me." For the first time the queen smiled slightly. But the moment did not last long. Suddenly the commander returned quickly. His expression looked even more serious than before. "Your Majesty," he said urgently, "we discovered something alarming." The queen turned toward him immediately. "What is it?" she asked. The commander activated a small holographic screen. An image of the palace security system appeared in the air. One section of the palace was glowing red. "That section contains the Royal Defense Control Center," the commander explained. "If someone takes control of that room, they can shut down the palace defenses completely." Daniel felt a cold feeling in his stomach. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "That room was just attacked." The commander nodded grimly. "Yes," he replied. "Security teams guarding the room were defeated 10 minutes ago." The Queen's eyes became cold and focused. "That means the real attack is just beginning," she said. Daniel straightened slowly despite his injuries. "You're telling me those 6 assassins were only the first wave," he said. The commander looked directly at him. "Yes," he answered. "And if the enemy takes control of the defense center, this palace will fall within minutes." The Queen turned toward Daniel again, her voice calm but serious. "Human," she said quietly, "you have already done more than anyone expected tonight." Daniel rubbed his injured shoulder carefully. "Something tells me you're about to ask for more help," he replied. The Queen nodded once. "Yes," she said, "because the traitor inside this palace already knows you stopped the assassins." Daniel frowned slightly. "And that's bad because," he asked. The Queen's answer came immediately. "Because now," she said calmly, "you are the next target." The room fell silent after the Queen's warning. Daniel Cross stood still for a moment, trying to understand what she had just said. He was only a mechanic who fixed broken engines. Now he had somehow become the next target in a deadly palace conspiracy. Daniel rubbed his injured shoulder and gave a tired sigh. "Fantastic," he said quietly. "I came here to warn someone, not to become famous." The commander of the Royal Guard stepped closer. "This is no joke, human," he said seriously. "If there is a traitor inside the palace, they will try to eliminate you before you can reveal what you know." Daniel looked confused. "But I don't know anything," he replied honestly. The Queen shook her head slowly. "You know enough," she said calmly. "You saw the assassins before anyone else, and you interrupted their plan." She walked toward the floating holographic display showing the palace map. "The enemy cannot allow you to speak publicly," she continued. Daniel looked at the glowing map carefully. One section of the palace was still flashing red. "The Defense Control Center," Daniel said quietly. The commander nodded. "If that room falls into enemy hands, they can disable every security system in the palace," he explained. Daniel stared at the map for a moment. Then he noticed something strange. Several small access tunnels were connected to the control center area. Maintenance tunnels, the kind mechanics used for repairs. Daniel stepped closer to the map. "Wait," he said slowly. "These tunnels connect to the control center." The commander looked at him with confusion. "Yes, but they are very narrow and rarely used," he said. Daniel nodded. "Exactly," he replied. "That means the attackers probably used them to enter the palace without being detected." The Queen's glowing eyes focused on the tunnels Daniel was pointing at. "That would explain how they moved so quickly through the palace," she said. The commander immediately turned to several soldiers. "Send teams to secure every maintenance tunnel immediately," he ordered. The soldiers rushed out of the chamber to follow the command. Daniel looked again at the map carefully, but something else caught his attention. One of the tunnels leading to the control center was still open on the security display. No guards were nearby. Daniel frowned. "That tunnel is unprotected," he said quietly. The commander looked surprised. "You are correct," he replied. "Security teams have not reached that section yet." Daniel pointed at the map again. "If the enemy is still moving through the tunnels, they will reach the control center before your soldiers," he said. The Queen looked thoughtful for a moment. Then she turned to Daniel again. "You understand these tunnels better than my soldiers," she said calmly. Daniel crossed his arms, already guessing what she was about to say. "You want me to go through them?" he said. The Queen nodded once. "Yes," she replied. The commander looked shocked. "Your Majesty, he is injured," he protested. "And he is not even a soldier." Daniel gave a small tired smile. "That part is very true," he said. But Daniel looked back at the map again. If the attackers reached the control center, the entire palace would lose its defenses. That would mean thousands of soldiers and civilians inside the palace could be in danger. Daniel took a deep breath. "All right," he said slowly. "But I have one condition." The commander raised an eyebrow. "You are negotiating now?" he asked. Daniel nodded slightly. "If I survive this, someone owes me a very long vacation," he replied. For a brief moment several soldiers smiled quietly. Even the commander seemed slightly amused. The Queen simply nodded calmly. "You have my word," she said. Moments later, Daniel was standing near the entrance to one of the maintenance tunnels. Two soldiers opened the narrow metal hatch leading into the dark passage. The tunnel looked small and cramped. Pipes and wires covered the walls. Daniel took a flashlight from one of the soldiers and stepped inside. The hatch closed quietly behind him. The tunnel was silent except for the faint sound of air moving through the pipes. Daniel moved forward slowly. His shoulder still hurt badly, but he forced himself to keep moving. After several minutes, he reached a small intersection inside the tunnel system. Daniel paused and listened carefully. At first, everything seemed quiet, but then he heard something. Footsteps, soft and careful. Someone else was moving through the tunnels. Daniel quickly turned off the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall. The footsteps grew closer. Two dark figures appeared around the corner ahead. They were not royal guards. Their armor was black and unfamiliar, enemy soldiers. Daniel held his breath as they walked past slowly, speaking quietly to each other. The control center is only 2 corridors away. One of them whispered, "The palace defenses will fall in minutes." The other replied. Daniel waited until they disappeared around the corner. Then he quietly followed them through the tunnel. His heart beat faster with every step. Finally, the tunnel opened into a small access door, leading directly into the Palace Defense Control Center. Daniel carefully looked through the small window in the door. Inside the room, he saw several enemy soldiers already standing near the control panels. But something else caught his attention. Standing in the center of the room was a tall alien wearing royal palace armor. Daniel felt his stomach drop immediately. The alien was not an attacker. He was one of the Queen's own high-ranking officers. The man calmly spoke to the enemy soldiers. "Once the defense systems are disabled, the palace will belong to us," he said confidently. Daniel stared in shock. The traitor inside the palace had finally revealed himself, and it was someone far more powerful than anyone expected. The commander of the royal guards himself. And at that moment, Daniel realized something even worse. If he did nothing, the Queen would be betrayed by her own army within minutes, and the entire empire would fall before sunrise. Daniel Cross stood silently in the dark maintenance tunnel, staring through the small window into the Palace Defense Control Center. Inside the room, enemy soldiers moved calmly around the glowing control panels, and standing among them was the last person Daniel expected to see, the commander of the royal guards, the same man who had spoken to the Queen only minutes ago. The same man who had ordered soldiers to seal the palace. Daniel felt a cold wave move through his body. The traitor had been standing beside the Queen the entire time, and now he was about to shut down every defense system protecting the palace. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. If he rushed in blindly, the enemy soldiers would kill him instantly. He needed to think like a mechanic. Machines always had weaknesses. And the control center was full of machines. Daniel carefully examined the control panels through the window again. One large central console controlled the entire palace defense system. If that console was damaged, the attackers would lose control of the palace network. But there was a problem. The console was surrounded by enemy soldiers. Daniel quietly opened the small maintenance bag still hanging from his belt. Inside were several repair tools and a small power battery. He looked at the battery for a moment. Then an idea formed in his mind. Daniel carefully removed 2 wires from the battery and connected them to a small metal device used for testing circuits. The device began sparking quietly. It was not a weapon, but it could create a strong electrical overload. Daniel slowly opened the access door leading into the control center. The door moved silently just a few centimeters. Inside the room, the traitor commander continued speaking confidently. "The Queen is already weak from the poison," he said. "Once the defenses fall, our fleet will arrive and the palace will belong to us." Several enemy soldiers nodded in agreement. None of them noticed the human mechanic quietly stepping into the room behind them. Daniel moved carefully along the wall, staying in the shadows. His heart pounded loudly in his chest. If anyone turned around now, it would be over. The commander walked closer to the main control console and placed his hand on the activation panel. "Prepare to shut down all palace defenses," he ordered. The enemy soldiers began typing commands into the system. Daniel realized he had only seconds left. He quickly threw the overloaded battery device toward the central console. For a moment nothing happened. Then the entire console exploded with sparks and electricity. A loud alarm filled the room as the system overloaded instantly. The control screens went dark. Energy surged through the network and shut down the enemy access commands. The soldiers spun around in shock. And that was when they finally saw him, a single injured human standing near the wall. "You," the traitor commander said with anger. "I should have known you would interfere again." The enemy soldiers raised their weapons immediately. Daniel raised his hands slowly. "Before you shoot," he said calmly, "you might want to listen." The commander narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Why would we listen to you?" he demanded. Daniel nodded toward the control console, still sparking with electricity. "Because you just lost control of the defense system," he replied. "And the Queen's soldiers are already on their way here." The commander's expression changed instantly. He turned toward one of the soldiers. "Check the system," he ordered quickly. The soldier tried to restart the console, but the screen remained dark. "The system is locked," the soldier said nervously. Daniel smiled slightly. "That happens when someone fries the main circuit," he explained. The commander looked furious. "You think this changes anything?" he said coldly. "Our fleet is already approaching the planet." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Maybe," he said, "but you forgot one important thing." The commander stared at him impatiently. "What is that?" he demanded. Daniel pointed calmly toward the entrance door behind them. The sound of heavy footsteps suddenly echoed in the hallway outside. Royal soldiers burst into the control center seconds later, their weapons aimed directly at the traitor and his allies. "Drop your weapons immediately," the soldiers shouted. The enemy soldiers hesitated. Within seconds, they were completely surrounded. The traitor commander slowly raised his hands in defeat. Moments later, the Queen herself entered the control center. Her glowing eyes immediately locked onto the captured commander. "You betrayed your empire," she said calmly. The commander said nothing. The soldiers quickly took the traitor and the enemy attackers into custody. The danger inside the palace was finally over. Daniel leaned against the wall, completely exhausted. His injuries and lack of sleep were finally catching up to him. The Queen walked toward him slowly. "You destroyed the enemy's plan and saved the palace," she said quietly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I mostly just broke things," he replied. The Queen smiled slightly at his answer. Then she turned to the soldiers around the room. "Remember this moment," she said clearly. "Tonight the Empire was saved not by an army, but by one human mechanic." The soldiers looked at Daniel with new respect. For centuries humans had been banned from the palace. But tonight a human had protected the Queen, stopped the assassins, exposed the traitor, and saved the Empire. The Queen looked at Daniel again and spoke one final sentence. "From this moment forward," she declared, "the ban on humans inside the palace is officially ended." Daniel blinked in surprise. "That's actually a pretty big promotion," he said quietly. The Queen smiled again. But she added something else that surprised him even more. "And Daniel Cross," she continued calmly, "you will not return to the docks." Daniel frowned slightly. "Oh," he said. "Am I in trouble again?" The Queen shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "You are now the royal engineer of the Arkan Empire, and just like that, the mechanic who fixed broken ships in a forgotten dock had become the human who changed the future of an entire galaxy."